Dawn, June 6, 1944. The sea is iron gray, rolling beneath a ceiling of storm clouds that seem almost alive. Wind scrapes across the channel, carrying the smell of salt, oil, and tension. On the bluffs above Normandy, men of the German 352nd Infantry Division peer through fog-streaked binoculars, eyes straining to see what the horizon conceals. They have waited for this moment for years, rehearsed it in silence, carved it into memory. Concrete bunkers crouch like beasts along the shoreline, their gunslits aimed toward a sea that has, until now, given them only emptiness. Engineers check the bolts on their MG-42s, hands numb from the cold metal. Mortar crews adjust their sights along carefully measured coordinates, each impact zone plotted with mathematical precision. In the command posts, officers murmur with weary confidence. They will never take this beach. For months, German propaganda has promised that the Atlantic Wall is impregnable, 1,500 miles of fortifications stretching from Norway to the Bay of Biscay, tens of millions of tons of concrete, hundreds of thousands of mines. Anti-tank obstacles rise like teeth from the sand. It is Europe's final armor, yet as dawn spreads, the fog begins to lift, and the horizon changes. First come the silhouettes of ships, hundreds, then thousands, appearing out of the gray like a continent on the move. 5,000 vessels, carrying men, machines, and the weight of a world's hope. The soldiers in their bunkers stand motionless, disbelief tightening their throats. The Atlantic Wall has never been tested by an enemy like this. Still, they believe. They have faith in their guns, their fortifications, their commanders' words. To them, the sea remains a moat, the cliffs an unscalable wall. But the truth moves closer with every wave, a truth forged not in concrete, but in will. And on this morning, that will is coming ashore. Beyond the grey water, unseen by the defenders, the first landing craft begin to lower their ramps. Aboard the USS Samuel Chase, the air is thick with diesel and prayer. The men of the 1st Infantry Division stand shoulder to shoulder in the dim hold, helmets resting on their knees, rifles slung across tired backs. Above them, the Atlantic heaves and groans, a restless sea preparing to deliver them to history. The ship's clock marks the minutes with mechanical indifference. Outside, dawn bleeds slowly into the mist. Chaplains move quietly among the ranks. Their words are soft, almost lost beneath the rumble of engines. For courage, for strength, for home. Hands clasp over dog tags, some polished bright from constant touch. Others write last letters, brief, awkward lines sealed in waterproof bags, entrusted to fate. There is no bravado here, only resolve born of necessity. Each man carries within him a fragile promise, to live long enough to see the shore. Officers descend the stairwells with maps rolled under their arms. Their voices echo against the steel. You will face fire like never before, but the world is watching. The words hang in the air, half warning, half benediction. For months they have studied diagrams of the French coast, memorized tide tables, rehearsed the timing of every assault wave. The plan is a masterpiece of logistics, down to the second. But war does not move by clockwork. On the deck, the smell of gasoline mingles with sea spray as the first Higgins boats are lowered into the surf. Ropes creak, metal screeches, and the grey water rises to meet the waiting hulls. Men climb down the cargo nets one by one, boots slipping, hearts steady. Each descent feels like stepping off the edge of the known world. The engines of the landing craft roar to life, their propellers biting into the cold water. Spray slaps against faces, salt stings the eyes. Officers shout orders through the wind, compass bearings, coordinates, fragments of structure amid chaos. Ahead, lies a coast invisible beneath the fog, yet already burning in imagination. They believe in the plan, in discipline, in precision, in the clean geometry of invasion. They believe that history itself can be conquered by timing. But history has never obeyed the clock. Beyond the rolling grey horizon, the storm they planned for begins to change its shape and its will. The ramps drop. In an instant, the sea becomes fire. The calm rhythm of the engines vanishes beneath a storm of bullets that shred the air and hammer the water like rain on steel. Within seconds, men vanish beneath the surf, rifles, helmets, and bodies swallowed together. The invasion that began as a plan now dissolves into chaos. Machine guns from the bluffs above Omaha rake the tide with merciless precision. Every burst finds its mark. Waves turn red. The tide runs backward with the weight of blood and debris. Some men try to crawl through the shallows, dragging wounded comrades across a beach that offers no shelter. Others sink beneath the waves, pulled down by packs and rifles heavier than courage itself. Commanders shout into radios that no longer answer. The frequency crackles with static, then goes silent. Landing craft burn along the shoreline, black smoke mingling with the mist of the morning. Medics vanish before they can reach the fallen. Leadership, so carefully built through months of training and order, dissolves in minutes. The beach becomes a graveyard before it becomes a battlefield. The sand offers no cover, the sea no mercy. Engineers, meant to clear obstacles, are cut down before their charges can be placed. Tanks meant to support the assault sink offshore, their crews trapped as the water closes above them. And yet, amid the ruin, movement persists. Small groups crawl forward, inch by inch, through wreckage and screams. There is no formation left, no chain of command, only fragments of will refusing to yield. The men who survive do not fight for orders anymore. They fight to exist beyond the next breath. Omaha, once a name on a map, becomes a crucible of truth, where plans vanish and reality takes command. Up on the cliffs, German observers reload and adjust their sights, unaware that amid the wreckage below, history has already begun to shift. 2 years before the beaches erupted in flame, the work began. Across the western coast of Europe, hammers rang against steel, and the whine of concrete mixers filled the air. Under the supervision of Organisation Tot, thousands of labourers, French, Dutch, Belgian, and conscripted prisoners, built what the Reich promised would be eternal, the Atlantic Wall, 15,000 bunkers, 6 million mines, 50 million tons of concrete poured into cliffs, dunes, and harbours. From Norway to the Pyrenees, the coast hardened into fortress geometry. It was 1942, and the tide of war still seemed to favour Germany. But Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, newly assigned to inspect the western defences, saw the illusion behind the numbers. He knew the Allies would not attack where expected, nor when convenient. He travelled the coast obsessively, coat pulled tight against the Atlantic wind, stopping at every strong point. To him, the wall was not a monument. It was a race against time. The enemy must be stopped on the beaches, he warned. If they get inland, we have lost. Under his command, defences grew teeth. Stakes tipped with explosives were driven into the sand to pierce landing craft. Mines were buried in dunes, tripwires stretched across fields. At Omaha, each sector was plotted with mathematical precision, every gun position arranged to overlap its neighbour's field of fire. Mortars and machine guns were zeroed to intersect at the waterline, where men would be most vulnerable. Even the slopes of the bluffs were measured for trajectory. From a distance, it seemed invincible. German officers toured the line with pride, pointing to their fortifications as proof of engineering perfection. Propaganda films spoke of Europe's shield, an unbroken barrier that would repel any invasion. The sea will defend us, one slogan declared, as if nature itself had taken the Reich's side. Yet within this confidence lay blindness. Resources dwindled, manpower stretched thin. Many bunkers stood empty, weapons obsolete, garrisons composed of aging veterans and foreign conscripts. The wall's very size became its weakness, a monument too vast to maintain. Rommel's warnings faded beneath layers of bureaucracy and arrogance. By 1944, belief had hardened into ritual. Inspections continued, but vigilance had dulled. The defenders trusted concrete more than imagination. They built for the last war, not the next. And so, the Atlantic Wall stood, immense, silent, and certain of its own strength. But out beyond the horizon, in shipyards and hangars, the Allies were already building something the wall could not stop, a storm of steel carried by the sea itself. Across the Channel, war becomes mathematics. In offices lit by dim bulbs and cigarette smoke, Allied planners bend over maps that stretch from England to Normandy, tracing arcs and angles as though victory could be plotted with compass and ruler. Every inch of coastline is measured, photographed, and studied. War, to them, is no longer a matter of courage alone. It is a problem of geometry waiting to be solved. Engineers take the lead in this new calculus. They design floating tanks, duplex-drive Shermans that promise to swim ashore beneath canvas screens inflated like lifeboats. Naval architects conceive Mulberry harbors, vast artificial ports that can be assembled at sea, each component prefabricated in secrecy across Britain. Rockets are built to saturate the beaches before the first landing craft arrives, turning sand into dust and bunkers into rubble. In this war, even the tide must obey design. Pilots from the Royal Air Force conduct photographic surveys at impossible altitudes, capturing every bunker, trench, and anti-tank wall in forensic detail. Geologists study sand samples smuggled from France by resistance agents, testing their composition for weight and grip. Meteorologists chart wind speeds, lunar cycles, and wave heights, translating nature into data. Nothing is left to chance, or so they believe. At Supreme Headquarters, planners speak with the confidence of engineers, not soldiers. They promise a mathematical certainty of victory. Charts show ideal drop zones, exact wave intervals, the moment when moonlight will fade into dawn. Operation Neptune, the naval arm of D-Day, is timed down to the minute. To the generals, precision becomes faith, but the Channel does not keep schedules. As June approaches, the weather turns. Low pressure builds over the Atlantic, sending storms eastward. Waves rise, clouds descend, and the sea itself seems to reject the invasion. The meteorological tables, perfect on paper, crumble under the weight of reality. On June 4, 1944, D-Day is postponed. The greatest amphibious assault in history waits for the wind to change. For 24 hours, 156,000 men remain in their ships, suspended between destiny and delay. Every hour of waiting threatens discovery. Every gust of wind redraws the future. Man has calculated everything, except indifference. The instruments of logic falter before the unpredictability of air and tide. But in a small weather station on the western edge of Britain, one forecast is about to break the impasse, and with it, the world will move again. Before the first soldier sees the shore, the sea itself begins to roar. At 05:30 a.m., the horizon flashes white. 13 battleships, 7 cruisers, and more than 100 destroyers open fire in unison. The Channel trembles under the recoil. In the darkness, each ship seems to breathe flame. Shells scream overhead, arching toward the French coast like falling stars. For the men watching from their transports, the noise is beyond comprehension. A single, continuous thunder that turns the night to smoke and fire. For nearly half an hour, the bombardment continues. The target, the fortifications of the German 352nd Infantry Division, the bunkers, pillboxes, and gun nests of Omaha Beach. The Allies unleash over 13,000 shells in the opening barrage. Observers aboard the fleet report columns of smoke rising from every point of impact. Through binoculars, the shore appears to vanish. The beach is flat, one officer declares. The defense is neutralized. It is the illusion every soldier prays to believe, but beneath that rolling smoke, the Atlantic wall still breathes. Most of the German bunkers, the Widerstandsnester, or resistance nests, are not on the surface. They are buried deep in rock and concrete, protected by layers of earth that no shell can reach. Their gun ports are narrow, their walls 3 meters thick. When the barrage hits, the men inside wait in silence, bracing as dust and shrapnel cascade through the vents. Then, when the thunder fades, they re-emerge. On the bluffs, German gunners unseal ammunition boxes, reload belts into their MG-42s, and check firing angles pre-sighted months before. Mortar teams lift their tubes, aligning by compass and habit. To them, the bombardment is not destruction, it is warning. Above the smoke, the sky turns gray again. The noise dies, and the sea falls eerily still. Out on the water, thousands of Allied soldiers mistake that silence for triumph. They look toward the coast, now blurred and ghostly in the haze, and believe the worst is over. Officers give the signal. Engines start, ramps lower, and the long lines of landing craft move toward shore. The plan has worked, or so it seems, but silence is not surrender. It is the pause before precision. In those final minutes before the ramps fall, the beach waits, not empty, but watchful. And when the fog lifts, the truth will break upon them, louder than any gun ever fired. The sea gives no warning. It only withdraws, revealing the broken shapes of landing craft, bodies and burning debris scattered across the surf. The first wave has shattered against Omaha, but fragments still move. Through the smoke and spray, men crawl toward the shore, their uniforms heavy with salt and blood. Every motion is a negotiation with death. Behind steel obstacles planted to rip open boats, survivors take cover where they can. Behind the jagged crosses of Czech hedgehogs, behind corpses, behind luck itself. Rifle fire ricochets off metal. Mortars burst above the tide, sending fountains of sand and bone into the air. The wounded cry for medics who will never come. There are no medics left. Combat engineers, burdened with explosives and wire cutters, try to clear paths through the mines. They have trained for precision, for measured progress through obstacles, but nothing about this place is measured. Most die before reaching the sand, torn apart as they work. Those who live continue anyway, their world reduced to one task: cut the wire, clear the path, or die trying. Within minutes, entire teams vanish, and yet the minefields begin to thin. Company commanders attempt to reassemble their units, but radios are useless, drowned in seawater. Many officers never make it ashore. Some drown beneath their gear, trapped in the undertow, with maps sealed in plastic bags, plans for an army now meaningless. Leadership, as a concept, disintegrates. The beachmasters who were meant to direct the assault are lost in the smoke, their signal flags invisible, their voices buried beneath artillery. The tide rises relentlessly, washing over the dead and the living alike. The boundaries between units dissolve. Men from different regiments crawl side by side, guided by instinct rather than rank. They no longer wait for orders. There are none to give. A corporal becomes a commander. A private becomes a decision. What remains of the invasion now advances on will alone. Each meter of sand becomes a campaign. For every man who moves forward, a dozen fall behind. The air smells of cordite and seawater, a mixture that feels permanent. At times, the soldiers mistake the crash of waves for gunfire and gunfire for waves. It no longer matters which is which. They are both the same, relentless, consuming, eternal. From the bluffs above, German gunners fire without pause. Ammunition belts run through their hands until the metal burns their palms. They are shooting at shapes, not men, at the movement of history itself. Still, among the chaos, the impossible begins to happen. Small groups reach the base of the cliffs. They start to dig, to crawl, to climb. The fire does not stop them. It only hardens their resolve. No general commands this advance. No radio coordinates it. It grows from something older, something wordless, the instinct to move forward when everything else collapses. By mid-morning, the tide erases the evidence of who began the climb. Names blur into motion. Courage becomes anonymous, and in that anonymity, the battle begins to turn. High above the beach, in a fortified position long thought unreachable, one explosion will soon open a breach, and from it, the invasion will begin anew. For hours, the beach has been nothing but slaughter, a narrow strip of sand between chaos and the sea. Yet by late morning, something begins to change. The survivors, once scattered and silent, start to gather behind the low ridges of sand and shingle. There is no command structure left to guide them, no voice to coordinate the storm. But the men of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions, bloodied and deafened, begin to find each other in the smoke. What was once panic becomes resolve. Behind the dunes, sergeants crawl from cover to cover, shouting to whoever can still hear. They pull together fragments of units, 8 men here, 12 there, strangers now fighting under the same instinct. Leadership has inverted. Rank has become irrelevant. The officers are dead or out of contact. The beach, stripped of hierarchy, begins to fight back through will alone. Closer to shore, the tide continues to rise, reclaiming the bodies left behind. But from the water's edge, salvation appears in steel. Allied destroyers, seeing the massacre unfold, break formation. Defying orders and depth limits, they steer dangerously close to the coast, so close that German gunners can see the hull numbers on their sides. The USS Karmic, USS Satterlee, and HMS Melbrake move within 1,000 yards of the beach, risking grounding and enemy artillery to deliver fire at point-blank range. Their guns thunder directly into the bluffs. Every shot tears through concrete, rock, and earth, silencing positions that hours earlier seemed immortal. The sound of those guns becomes a language of coordination. On the beach, with radios drowned or destroyed, soldiers signal the ships using colored smoke grenades, green for advance, red for danger. The plumes twist through the wind and flame, guiding the naval gunners to targets invisible through the haze. Slowly, methodically, the German strongpoints begin to crumble. Meanwhile, the engineers, the same men who had crawled ashore under fire, begin their second impossible task. With what remains of their explosives, they improvise. Bangalore torpedoes, meant for wire cutting, are turned into makeshift anti-bunker weapons. Satchel charges are thrown by hand into gun ports, the explosions shaking the ground and collapsing pillboxes from within. Where the planned demolitions failed, ingenuity fills the void. No one waits for orders now. A private armed with a flamethrower clears a trench by instinct. A corporal marks a path through the minefield with a bayonet stuck upright in the sand. Combat, stripped of structure, becomes democracy. Decisions made not by rank, but by proximity and courage. By noon, the transformation is complete. What began as chaos has become a mosaic of small, coordinated acts, each man's initiative feeding the next. The defenders, overwhelmed by the sudden coherence of the attack, begin to falter. Machine guns fall silent one by one. The tide, both literal and human, has turned. Up on the cliffs, German officers stare through rangefinders, unable to understand how the beach they had destroyed is now advancing toward them. The men they believed pinned and broken are moving again, crawling through smoke and fire, inch by inch, toward the slopes. No general ordered this, no plan accounted for it. It was not discipline that brought them this far. It was endurance, the quiet refusal to stop moving. By the time the last destroyer ceases fire, the beach no longer belongs to the sea. It belongs to those who would not stay down. And somewhere among the shattered cliffs, one breach finally opens, a narrow path upward toward the heart of the fortress itself. By early afternoon, the impossible begins to take shape. Smoke still hangs thick over the channel, and the air hums with the echo of naval guns. Along the western edge of Omaha Beach, the cliffs loom like a wall between survival and oblivion. 200 feet of jagged limestone, scarred by explosions and shrouded in mist. At their base, a handful of soldiers gather in the surf, soaked, half-deaf, and wordless. Above them waits the German line, still firing, still convinced the invaders will drown before they climb. But the invaders climb. At Pointe du Hoc, 225 Rangers begin their ascent using ropes fired from rocket launchers. The cords, slick with seawater, slap against the cliff face as men dig their boots into the rock. German defenders lean over the edge, cutting lines, dropping grenades. Each fall sends echoes down the cliffside, swallowed by wind and waves. Still, the Rangers rise, some with knives clenched between their teeth, others using bare hands when the ropes burn through. By 0730, a few reach the top. They emerge not as soldiers, but as ghosts, crawling through cratered ground still reeking of cordite. At Omaha, the struggle mirrors their climb. The draws, narrow gullies labeled E1 and F1, become arteries of hope. Infantrymen, engineers, and stray survivors converge, flanking the bluffs that had seemed untouchable. The terrain is brutal, mud slicked with blood, cliffs splintered by shellfire, wire tangled like thorns. Yet they move, slowly, relentlessly, driven by a rhythm older than command. The fighting at the crest is primitive. Hand grenades in trenches, bayonets in bunkers, smoke thick enough to blur the boundary between friend and foe. German positions fall one by one, each bunker silenced by proximity and persistence. The defenders, once confident behind their concrete, find themselves hunted through their own defenses. Machine gun crews retreat deeper into tunnels that have become traps. The myth of the wall begins to fracture from within. By midday, small groups of Americans, some Rangers, some infantry, none under direct command, stand atop the bluffs. Below them, the beach still burns. Around them, the air is filled with the stench of cordite and the silence that follows exhaustion. A few German gunners, realizing their isolation, slip away into the hedgerows beyond. Snipers, who have haunted the beach since dawn, fall silent one by one, their positions discovered, their shots finally answered. The breach is not sudden. It is the slow breaking of inevitability. The Atlantic Wall, built over years, begins to crumble over hours, not through overwhelming force, but through accumulation, of courage, of exhaustion, of refusal to die where one stands. From the command ships offshore, observers finally glimpse movement atop the cliffs. For the first time that day, reports come not of slaughter, but of progress. The phrase that appears in the logbooks is brief, almost clinical. Enemy positions being taken. But beneath those words lies a revelation. The fortress that Hitler built to hold Europe has been pierced by ordinary men. acting without coordination, driven by will alone. By afternoon, the high ground above Omaha is in Allied hands. From there they can see the scale of what they've endured, the bodies, the wreckage, the ships still smoldering offshore. Yet amid that ruin stands proof that the impossible has limits. Every fortress, no matter how vast, depends not only on walls, but on the fear that defends them. And fear, once broken, cannot be rebuilt. Beyond the cliffs, fields stretch inland, calm, green, deceptively peaceful. But in those fields lies the next battle, and the war is far from over. By 10 a.m., the rhythm of battle changes again. For hours, the beach has been a grave, smoke and surf indistinguishable, every wave carrying the dead back to shore. But now, through that haze, a new sound rises. The deep concussion of naval artillery echoes across the cliffs. 13 battleships, their decks blackened by spent shells, fire again, not at the beach, but at the high ground beyond. The bombardment rolls like thunder across Normandy, shaking loose the earth itself. The very bluffs that had once defied the invasion now begin to crumble under the weight of steel. On the horizon, a different shape appears, blunt-nosed, lumbering, defiant. Sherman tanks, long delayed by weather and chaos, finally reach Omaha. Half never make it ashore, swamped by surf, drowned with their crews inside. The rest crawl out of the water like beasts of burden, treads churning through the shallows, exhausts belching black smoke. They are not elegant machines. They are survivors, dented, leaking, streaked with oil and salt. Yet to the men still pinned on the beach, their arrival feels like a promise kept. With the tanks comes movement. Infantry, once stranded behind obstacles and dunes, begins to surge forward in broken lines. Engineers, out of equipment, use rifles instead of pliers. Wire that was meant to stop the invasion becomes its ladder. Cut, trampled, pushed aside. Mortar shells burst above them, scattering fragments that whistle like bees. Still, the men advance. One ditch, one crater, one breath at a time. On the German side, the situation deteriorates with shocking speed. The Atlantic Wall's command structure, designed for precision, collapses in confusion. Field telephones go dead. Radio operators report interference and silence. Artillery batteries run out of shells, Ammunition dumps burn, detonating in waves that echo down the coastline. From their dugouts, the defenders see the American infantry rising from the smoke and assume a second wave has landed. Panic begins to ripple through the ranks. Small groups retreat inland. Others surrender, dazed and bloodied. For the first time that day, the German machine hesitates, not for lack of courage, but because the order that held it together has dissolved. By midday, the first real breach forms. A narrow path cuts through wire and trench, connecting the beach to the bluffs. Soldiers of the 116th Infantry Regiment seize the opportunity. They move uphill under covering fire, each step an act of defiance against gravity and exhaustion. Their boots sink into the wet earth, their hands raw from crawling. Near the summit, a private, his name lost in conflicting reports, raises a small American flag torn from a pack. It is not ceremony, it is proof. Below him, the tide still carries the cost of that ascent. Bodies tangled in wreckage, helmets drifting like buoys. The wind that whips the flag carries with it the smell of cordite and death. Around him, the survivors pause, not in triumph, but disbelief. The beach that had promised only annihilation now lies behind them. Ahead, the fields of Normandy stretch inland, green, silent, unscarred. The invasion has not yet succeeded, but something irreversible has begun. The bluffs, once symbols of German invincibility, have been taken by men who were never meant to survive the landing. The battle is no longer about beaches or bunkers. It is about momentum. In that moment, amid the ruin of both armies, the balance of the war shifts. Victory does not announce itself. It emerges, quietly, uncertainly, from the shadow of loss. And even as the flag flutters over the bluff, the men who planted it know the hardest miles still lie ahead, somewhere beyond the hedgerows of Normandy. By midday, the thunder fades. The roar of guns that once drowned the sea begins to thin into an uneasy silence. Smoke, which for hours had cloaked the horizon, drifts inland in slow, dissolving columns. Through it, the shape of Omaha Beach re-emerges, not as a battlefield, but as a scar. The tide glitters faintly under the sun, carrying with it the wreckage of an empire's gamble, shattered craft, helmets, rifles, and men. For the survivors, it is no longer mourning. It is a lifetime lived in 6 hours. On the sand, engineers begin the grim work of rebuilding order from ruin. Bulldozers, ferried across the channel under fire, grind their way through debris, carving makeshift exits from the beachhead. Craters become roads. Wreckage becomes shelter. Every machine movement carries the echo of those who cleared the way with their bodies. The air smells of fuel, cordite, and salt, the scent of persistence. Medics, their red crosses barely visible beneath grime and blood, move among the wounded with quiet rhythm. There are no distinctions anymore, only breath and silence. They cut away uniforms stiff with seawater, improvise splints from rifle stocks, and call for morphine they no longer have. The cries of the injured blend with the steady thrum of the surf, a sound both eternal and indifferent. For many, it is the first moment they can truly look around and understand what has been endured. By early afternoon, the beach begins to resemble something alive again. Commanders, once scattered or cut off, re-establish contact through field radios and runners. The static of disconnection gives way to fragments of coordination. Orders are spoken again. Hoarse, simple, absolute. Push forward, link with the airborne. The invasion's machinery, battered but not broken, begins to turn once more. Reinforcements arrive in a second wave. Fresh troops stepping onto a beach that still smolders. They walk past the fallen without ceremony, their faces set, their movements mechanical. Artillery units disembark behind them, dragging guns through sand that clings like ash. The weapons sink into position at the base of the bluffs, barrels turning inland. For the first time since dawn, the fire begins to move outward, away from the sea, toward the heart of occupied France. And yet, victory feels hollow. Omaha is not conquered, it is endured. No flag, no speech, no trumpet marks the moment of success. It exists only in the stillness between bombardments, in the realization that the line has held, that the tide has not carried them back. For the men still standing, survival itself has become defiance. High above the beach, within a German command post near Colville, confusion reigns. Communications are fractured, orders conflict. Reports stream in from the front, fragmented, panicked, disbelieving. At 1 p.m., an officer finally transmits the words that will echo through the Reich. The enemy is pouring through. The wall that was meant to hold for 1,000 years has cracked in half a day. The Atlantic Wall does not fall with an explosion. It erodes, silently, incrementally, heartbeat by heartbeat. Each decision to move forward, each act of courage, each refusal to surrender chips away at its myth. By late afternoon, the beach is both a cemetery and a beginning. Behind the survivors, the sea keeps its secrets. Ahead, the fields of Normandy wait, deceptively quiet, concealing the next test of endurance. And as dusk begins to form over the channel, the men who have lived through the longest morning know The day is far from over. By evening, the light softens over Normandy. The storm that began at dawn has spent itself, leaving behind a silence heavy with smoke and consequence. Across 50 miles of French coastline, 5 beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword, now form a single, unbroken front. The Atlantic Wall, once promised as Europe's final shield, has been breached at every seam. Where fortresses once stood, there is only ruin, and in that ruin, the beginning of liberation. German resistance, fierce and disciplined through the morning, begins to dissolve behind the lines. Field commanders send fragmented reports to higher headquarters. Communications lost, artillery silenced, defenses gone. Units that once boasted of impenetrable positions now retreat through the bocage, the tangled hedgerows that stretch inland like a labyrinth. Some fight on, isolated and without orders, their fortifications turned against them by the speed of collapse. Others surrender, stunned, still blinking against the daylight they never thought would reach them. By nightfall, Rommel's prophecy has come true. Months earlier, inspecting the wall he helped strengthen, he warned Berlin. The first 24 hours will decide everything. The fate of Germany will be decided on the beaches. His warning was both tactical and moral. He understood that no wall, however vast, could replace vigilance or humility. Now, on the evening of June 6, 1944, his words hang like an epitaph over the Channel. The Atlantic Wall, 2 years in the making, 50 million tons of concrete, has been undone in a single day. The engineers who built it believed in permanence. The soldiers who defended it believed in its strength. But history measures walls not by the materials that compose them, but by the moments that undo them. The truth of D-Day is not conquest, but erosion, a steady, human wearing down of the impossible. As night deepens, the survivors begin to dig. On the beaches that bear their names, men of both armies carve shallow graves into the sand. They bury their comrades where they fell, by the waterline, beneath the cliffs, among the wrecked craft still hissing with flame. There are no flags, no chaplains, no words loud enough to fill the stillness that follows. Only the scrape of shovels against wet sand, and the low murmur of waves returning to claim the day's debris. From offshore, the fleets remain anchored, thousands of ships resting in a grey expanse of calm water. Their decks are littered with the evidence of the day. Blood-stained stretchers, empty shell casings, helmets stacked like offerings. The air smells of oil and salt, the scent of victory indistinguishable from loss. On the horizon, faint artillery flashes mark the next phase of the war. The beachhead has held, but the campaign for Europe has only begun. As darkness falls, the tide begins to rise. It rolls across the sand without pause or reverence, covering the trenches, the wreckage, the graves. It returns to the same rhythm it held before the first shot was fired. Eternal, unjudging, indifferent. The sea cleanses nothing, it merely conceals. What the Allies have gained in a day, others will spend months consolidating. What the Germans have lost in an afternoon, they will spend a century remembering. Every empire, in its final hour, builds its monuments to futility, stone, steel, ideology, and mistakes endurance for eternity. But no wall, no doctrine, no army can outlast the patience of time. By midnight, the coast of Normandy lies under the same moon that had watched the invasion begin. The beach is quiet again, too quiet, almost peaceful, as though the earth itself refuses to remember what it has just witnessed. And somewhere beyond the shoreline, the wind moves through the hedgerows, carrying with it the first whispers of what the world will soon call freedom. When the guns finally fall silent, the counting begins. For 8 hours, the line between sea and land had been a furnace, Now it becomes a ledger. On Omaha alone, more than 2,400 Americans lie dead. Nearly 5,000 more are wounded. Their bodies, scattered across 4 miles of sand, mark the cost of a foothold no wider than a whisper on a map. The tide moves among them like a mourner, touching each without distinction. Across the cliffs, burial details begin their work before the day has fully ended. Helmets become markers. Rifles are planted in the sand, their muzzles pointing skyward, tags fluttering in the wind. Chaplains whisper prayers over the roar of bulldozers digging temporary graves. The ground, once fortified by concrete, now holds the men who breached it. German losses are lighter but no less final. Roughly 1,200 dead, 3,000 captured or missing. Many of them young, conscripts from Poland, Ukraine, and Russia pressed into service by occupation. They had defended foreign soil under a flag that was never theirs. Among their possessions, Allied soldiers find letters written in languages they cannot read, messages to families who will never receive them. In the days that follow, reporters arrive by landing craft, stepping cautiously among the wreckage. Cameras record what words cannot: the burned-out tanks, the sand darkened by oil and blood, the gulls circling above what was once called invincible. The smell of war, iron, salt, decay, clings to everything. It will not leave for weeks. The soldiers who survived speak little. Their letters home are brief, almost detached. "It was a day no one should survive," one writes. Another tells his wife, "We made it, but I don't know why I did." The language of victory does not belong to them. It belongs to those who stayed behind. For the men of Omaha there is no elation, only exhaustion. In command posts far from the sand, generals assess the operation in numbers and charts. The invasion is declared a success. The planners, the strategists, the architects of Neptune and Overlord, they measure the day by what it achieved, not by what it consumed. "It was necessary," one writes in his report. Necessary. The word is cold, efficient, and unarguable. But for those who stood in the surf and saw the sea turn red, necessity feels indistinguishable from madness. The beach earns its new name in whispers that spread through the ranks. Bloody Omaha. It is spoken without anger, almost as confession, a way to acknowledge the line that separated planning from experience, order from chaos, reason from survival. War, in its purest form, reduces everything to arithmetic. But even arithmetic falters here. No equation can weigh what was gained against what was lost. When evening comes, the beach glows under a soft, indifferent sun. The tide rises again, folding over the footprints, the shell casings, the blood. The sea begins its endless work of erasure, but memory resists. And as the survivors look inland toward the green fields of France, they understand. The battle for the beach is over, but the war for meaning has only just begun. The echo of Omaha crosses the channel before the smoke has cleared. Radio signals, coded and chaotic, move faster than the tide. From the command ships offshore, brief messages reach London. The beaches are secure, heavy casualties. For the first time in history, the largest amphibious invasion ever attempted has succeeded, not by precision, but by persistence. Yet victory feels strangely hollow, carried more by exhaustion than triumph. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill sits before the operations map in the war rooms beneath Whitehall. Red pins mark the beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword, a geometry of hope pinned to the northern coast of France. The early reports are fragmented, progress slow, severe resistance, objectives not yet taken. Then, hours later, the words he has waited years to hear. Omaha held. The relief is tempered by the cost. When the casualty figures arrive, he removes his glasses and weeps quietly, unseen by his aides. Publicly, he will call the invasion the beginning of Europe's liberation. Privately, he will never forget the price of that beginning. Across occupied Europe, the news spreads in whispers and static. In the underground cellars of Paris, resistance fighters tune their illegal radios to the BBC, hearing a single coded phrase that signals everything has changed. Les sanglots, longs des violons de l'automne. The message, delivered days before, now fulfills its meaning. For millions living under occupation, the invasion is more than strategy. It is vindication. Hope, once a rumor, has found a sound. In Berlin, disbelief replaces arrogance. Reports from Normandy arrive in fragments, contradictory, desperate, impossible. For 2 years, the Reich's propaganda had promised that no army could breach the Atlantic Wall. Now the breach is undeniable. Officers in the high command argue over who is to blame: the weather, deception, or hesitation. Hitler, informed late in the day, refuses to believe that the main landing has come in Normandy at all. This is a diversion, he insists, but by the time he realizes the truth is already irreversible. The myth of invincibility begins to dissolve. The Wehrmacht, once the embodiment of order and momentum, finds itself fighting not for victory, but for delay. The defenses that stretched from Norway to Spain, built with such confidence, are exposed as monuments to human blindness. Each bunker, each turret, each strand of wire becomes a relic of a faith in permanence. The Atlantic Wall did not collapse from force alone. It was eroded by time, weather, and the unrelenting patience of those who refused to stop coming. In Rome, newly liberated, church bells ring through the streets. In Moscow, Stalin receives the coded message confirming the Western invasion, and a brief, grim smile passes over his face. The second front he demanded has arrived. The Allies, once divided by ideology and distance, are now bound by blood and necessity. For those still fighting on the continent, in the forests of Belgium, the fields of Holland, the ruins of Warsaw, the meaning of Omaha reaches deeper than geography. It proves that tyranny is not eternal. It proves that even the most fortified lie can fracture beneath the weight of will. When night falls over Normandy, the beaches lie quiet again. The waves wash over the sand, carrying fragments of uniforms and spent shells, whispering the same indifferent rhythm they have always known. But across Europe, that same tide carries something else, the faint, unstoppable sense that the end has begun. Walls of tyranny never fall to power alone. They fall to endurance, to the countless, unseen acts of courage that refuse to vanish. And far from the beaches, in the occupied cities and hidden forests, thousands listen for that echo and begin to rise. Today, Omaha lies quiet. The wind moves softly through the grass atop the bluffs, where once the air was filled with fire. Below, the sand stretches smooth and unbroken, its golden surface betraying nothing of what it once absorbed. Here, beneath the dunes and the calm surf, the remains of June 6, 1944, still sleep, rusted helmets buried under layers of tide-worn sand, shattered steel pressed flat by 70 years of weather and memory. Rows of white crosses rise behind the shore, so perfectly aligned they seem drawn by compass rather than hand. The Normandy American Cemetery looks out over the same water that once ran red. Each stone bears a name, a rank, a date, and for thousands, only the word, unknown. When the wind passes through the pines above the graves, it sounds like the low murmur of the sea, the same rhythm that once carried them toward their fate. The tide still rises where men once crawled through hell. Every wave that breaks upon this beach completes a circle, washing over the same sand where soldiers fought, fell, and vanished. The sea remembers in silence, never revealing what it keeps. Fishermen along the coast still pull fragments of history from the water: a buckle, a rusted bayonet, the jagged edge of a landing craft. Time, patient and impartial, returns everything to anonymity. Historians call Omaha the price of freedom. They calculate it in numbers, in strategies, in the geometry of loss. They write of tactics and courage, of operations and necessity. But for those who survived, the meaning was simpler and heavier. They call it the cost of obedience, the unspoken faith that what they were asked to do had to be done, no matter the odds, no matter the beach. The Atlantic Wall remains only in fragments. Scattered bunkers cling to the cliffs, their concrete eroded by wind and salt. Moss grows where machine guns once rested. The iron doors have rusted into the earth. What was once declared impregnable now stands as a monument to human hubris, proof that no empire, no ideology, no wall of stone can outlast the will that rises against it. Each June, as the veterans return, the beach becomes both sacred and ordinary. Children play where soldiers fell. Locals set out flowers beside the bunkers. The horizon glows with the same light that greeted the first wave. The passage of time does not erase the event. It only transforms it, from battle to memory, from fear to reverence, from blood to silence. And yet, even in that silence, the weight of that morning endures. Omaha is more than a battlefield. It is a mirror, reflecting both the cruelty of necessity and the fragility of belief. It reminds us that history is not written by those who planned it, but by those who endured it. The beach that was never supposed to fall became the beach that defined a century. From its sand rose the slow unraveling of tyranny, the beginning of Europe's freedom, and the quiet promise that courage, even when surrounded by chaos, can outlast concrete and command. They built it to last forever. It fell before noon.